Story 1. I was wildly depressed and occasionally suicidal. I was told it was hormones and totally normal teenage issues. I masked my feelings by overachieving and filling my calendar with sports, live music, and clubs. I achieved the highest SAT score at my school but had the lowest GPA among the advanced placement students. When I got to college, I took Psychology 101 my first semester, and when we learned about the symptoms of depression, I realized I checked all the boxes. I sought help and eventually turned out okay. Story 2. Homeless and realizing that nobody cares about you if you do not have anything to offer in return. Story 3. I experimented with various substances and followed different trends, including goth, raver, punk, metalhead, and alternative fashion. I wore JNCO pants, camo shorts, and band shirts, smoked cigarettes, and drank alcohol underage. In the end, I turned out to be okay. Story 4. I would have punished myself more than my parents punished me. I was an emotional, hormonal, unappreciative person. They were much more patient with me than I realized at the time. Story 5. Born in 1976, I was reliable and trustworthy, polite and courteous. My parents allowed me to do almost anything I wanted because I could be counted on. There were plenty of fun activities, but I was never interested in drugs or drinking. Story 6. I was an absolute mess mentally and physically, wearing a lot of camouflage-patterned clothing and chain smoking. I'm still a bit of a mess, but at least I don't smoke or dress poorly anymore. Story 7. It was a period of isolation. I dropped out of school, didn't have a job, lacked friendships, and had never had a girlfriend. I lived in a small, rundown lakeside community with my dad. I rarely saw him and never encountered anyone else. I read, watched movies, took long walks, kept a dream journal, and stayed up all night watching television. I essentially took time to recover from my school experience and childhood and began figuring out who I was. Thankfully, this happened before the internet became widespread. Story 8. Dark and depressing for the most part, with rare glimpses of real joy. Could have been much worse, so we are fine. Story 9. My family were liberal Mormons who were very devoted to their religion, so they made me attend church school in the morning before regular school. Most of the Mormon kids didn't want to give me the time of day because I was liberal and my best friend was an atheist. Every morning during high school, I had to sit with these judgmental individuals. I am grateful to be done with that experience. Story 10. I am 44 years old and I am very proud of how I handled myself as a teenager. I focused on things that were important for my future. My parents did not provide a traditional upbringing and had a lot of drama in their lives while I was growing up. They drank and partied frequently, and both were married multiple times during my childhood. My mother even married a drug dealer when I was in my teens, and my father married a narcissistic, alcoholic, abusive woman. I had to seek guidance and peace from other people and places. Despite the challenges around me, I made many great choices, kept a level head, and found joy in life. Story 11. I am now 39 years old. My teenage years were quite normal. I got along with everyone in high school but had a small, close-knit friend group. I was into biking and hockey, which took up a lot of my time, so I didn't get involved in drugs or trouble. I had a good relationship with my parents and wouldn't have changed it. Story 12. All of my friends had lost their virginity except for me, so I got caught up in trying to be liked by boys. I ended up making many poor decisions. Story 13. I felt suicidal and no one cared. I never received the vaccines I was supposed to get, so I will probably die before I turn 40. Story 14. I hated being a teenager. I skipped high school to help my parents take care of my sick grandparents because my mother's siblings didn't want to help her. At the time, all I wanted was to be loved since my parents weren't there emotionally, only financially. I dislike this old-school parenting mentality that assumes providing financially means a child should be happy, even if they don't receive hugs or emotional support. I went to college early and wasted years partying, still yearning for love, as my mother never emotionally supported me. Each time I cried, she and my dad called me and my sister stupid. Story 15. It was quite ordinary. I was rather simple, didn't drink, didn't smoke, had a girlfriend and good friends. I went a bit wild between the ages of 21 and 24 and then returned to my simple life. Story 16. I grew up in a small town in the 1980s and 1990s. While there were smaller groups, they did not resemble defined social groups like jocks, goths, or metalheads. Most people overlapped into several categories. For example, after school, I spent time with friends who didn't fit into the typical groups. At school, I socialized with the academically gifted students. I was a mathlete, but I also participated in sports. Story 17. I was under the influence from the age of 14 to 19 consistently. I partied every weekend and drank excessively, but I do not regret any of it. I flirted with disaster too many times and feel fortunate to be alive. Story 18. I call it the waiting period. I was raised in a small town, relatively close to better opportunities. There was no real path to success in my entire county unless you were willing to engage in politics, which I couldn't do because my family lacked money and influence. So I waited to leave that town and go to college. I felt awkward and like a loner, being a single child of a single mother and growing up in a sheltered Christian culture. I focused on preparing myself for college. The first 2 years in college were my peak, both mentally and physically. Unfortunately, I wasn't prepared for the lifestyle change that came with my first office job. Story 19. I was unfair to my dad, who really didn't do anything wrong except urge me to improve in life and get my act together. I hope my child doesn't grow up the way I did because I don't think I could handle myself as a teenager. Story 20. It is frustrating when everyone around me acts as if failing even one test at school would mean my entire life would fall apart. Story 21. I wasn't smart or popular, but my ignorance was bliss. I had a few great friends, stayed busy with a fast food job, and ran track. I was even active in church. All of that seemed to fade with age. Story 22. I was a quiet person, depressed and dressed in all black, wearing many shirts with humorous sayings. I had friends, but they were not really nice to me. I struggled with self-harm. It was difficult. However, now I am an adult, though I don't feel like one. Story 23. My teenage phase was marked by rebellion, where I often disregarded my parents' guidance. I was reckless with teenage boys, thinking I knew everything and was invincible to health and consequences. Now, I have a deep appreciation for my parents, particularly my dad, who has been the sole provider and always prioritized our family. He has made many personal sacrifices for our well-being. I am now committed to making sacrifices for my father, as his support has helped me come full circle. I'm relieved that I didn't harm my body or create lasting consequences on my record. I'm grateful I was able to move past partying and experimenting with various activities. Story 24. Undiagnosed autistic, I was an awful people pleaser. Friends used, bullied, and manipulated me, and I had no idea. I just enjoyed making people laugh while I was incredibly sad and confused. On the surface, I would go back and have fun again. Deeper than that, no. It was actually traumatic when I reflected on it after my diagnosis. Story 25. Dad ruled the house with an iron fist, so it didn't really change until I went to college for a brief period at 17 to 19. I continued this way into my 20s, to be honest. I made up for all that lost time, doing everything I could think of and more. I was lucky not to be dead or permanently messed up somehow. Story 26. I was bored. I was too stressed by school and extracurricular activities. I occasionally hung out with friends. I grew up in Boston, so we could go downtown and do whatever. However, I was in the band, involved with an arts nonprofit, worked part-time, and sometimes took weekend college classes. There was no time. Story 27. I may have been partially responsible for the increase in fascist acceptance. I had a whole cult following on a forum and everything. It went to my head. Story 28. It was amazing. It was during the peak of MySpace. We had house parties, bonfires, and did a lot of fun things. I really appreciate the years from 2005 to 2009. Story 29. I was an emotional atheist with a rebellious attitude. 20 years later, I look back on myself with fondness and sympathy. I was dealing with a lot, and I'm in a better place now. For what it's worth, I still like anime, and the song Centuries still resonates with me. Story 30. I was a teenage boy in the early 2000s. It was pretty chill. I played a lot of games like RuneScape, Halo, Super Smash Bros., and Guitar Hero. I played sports, hung out with friends, went to movies and got pizza, or just relaxed in random parks. My friends were all pretty nerdy, and we didn't get into drugs, sex, alcohol, or anything edgy like that. The most daring thing we did was climb onto the roof of the school to hang out. I got along well with my parents and maintained good grades. My wardrobe is the same 20 years later. Sneakers, jeans, t-shirts, and hoodies. Story 31. DeviantArt, My Chemical Romance, Gorillaz, Evanescence, Adult Swim, Cartoon Network, Anime, Hot Topic, MySpace, Facebook. That should paint a picture well enough. Story 32. I was self-centered and believed I was smarter than I actually am. I also held some prejudiced views due to my environment, but I recognized this and moved beyond active racism before leaving my teenage years, though I am still addressing subtle biases. I used to believe I was the most important person in the world and that everything would effortlessly align for me because of my relatively fortunate life. I am fortunate that I did not become a negative person. Story 33. Everyone teased me that I wanted to be intimate with my parents because I was too shy to get any dates. Either that or they thought I was a pedophile. I was also nicknamed for not confronting my uncle for farting on my head. It was one of the worst experiences of my life, and it would have been much easier if just one person had expressed interest in being my girlfriend. High school taught me that the world is cruel. Story 34. I graduated in 2006. I feel like the party scene really took off, probably due to movies like Beer Fest and popular songs that seem to focus on drinking and having a good time. That's what we did. 17-year-old me would have easily outdrunk my current self. It was all anyone cared about. Making it to the weekend and finding out who was having the party. Beer pong and games were central to our gatherings. Overall, it was a messy time, but I learned a lot about life from those nights of binge drinking that often turned chaotic. Now, when I go to parties and see people being sloppy and aggressive, I think to myself that they should have figured this out in high school. Story 35. I played video games, watched anime, and played Dungeons and Dragons before they became mainstream and popular. I was essentially a fan before it became trendy among teens. You younger generations can thank us older enthusiasts for paving the way. Now, I don't participate in any of those activities anymore. Story 36. Mostly playing online games in an internet cafe while listening to K-pop and obsessing over K-pop in general. Story 37. I am essentially the same person at 35, just more mature. I still have the same interests and engage in the same activities. I was a nerdy child who enjoyed rock music, video games, and anime, and that has not changed. Story 38. I felt lost and confused. I didn't have my priorities straight. I prioritized socializing and having fun over preparing myself for a successful future as an adult. Story 39. I wish I had done more and tried to do more. I regret not being fit and not joining the military, which could have allowed me to leave my hometown and explore new opportunities. Being an unexciting adult is a consequence of being an unexciting child. My cautious nature as a teenager made me feel intelligent because adults praised it, but now I wake up every day cherishing my favorite memories of when I took risks. Story 40. I was too busy trying to survive. I came from an abusive family that forced me to go out on my own at the age of 15. Life was still challenging, but it improved significantly once I gained my independence. Story 41. I made many poor decisions as well as some good ones, but I made it out alive. In my early 20s, I realized how little I knew, and my way of life changed for the better. I regret putting my parents through all the hassle that I caused. I was too young and focused on my own interests to realize they were affected as well. I wrote them an apology letter in my 30s. Story 42. The teenage years consist of multiple phases. It begins with the sudden onset of puberty, characterized by physical changes and shifts in behavior. Emotionally volatile, interests shift from childhood activities to pop culture. There is an obsession with image, often centered around the idolization of a pop star or movie star, which can be quite cringeworthy. During the middle teen years, there is a bit more stabilization, but for males, there is often a surge in reckless behavior, a lack of understanding of consequences, and the onset of a phase marked by risky experimentation with alcohol, smoking, drugs, and sex. In the late teen years, there is a strong desire for independence from parents, yet there remains a level of naivety about how the world operates. While hopes and dreams may be unrealistic, this phase also marks the beginning of deeper critical thinking and improved behavior. Story 43. I barely remember you. Forget the past and embrace adulthood. You do cooler things now, and sometimes you think, wow, I was stuck doing uninteresting things as a kid. Story 44. It wasn't that long ago, but I was very chaotic. My parents should have done more. My safe haven was that I always had good grades. Story 45. I am learning programming and coding constantly. At 22, I am currently doing an artificial intelligence internship at a great startup in my country. All those hours spent indoors learning programming and coding during my teens are really paying off. However, I cannot deny that I feel a sense of regret for not fully enjoying my teenage years. I don't remember having fun or friends. Story 46. I was sheltered and alone, keeping to myself most of the time. I remembered getting a counselor for clinical depression, but it didn't lead to much progress. I had at least one or two friends, but I eventually drifted away from them by the end of high school. I guess I just didn't connect with them anymore. Other than that, it was a lot of fandom role-playing and random forum posting online. Story 47. Wholesome and earnest, with lots of deep conversations about poetry and philosophy. There was a yearning to blossom and an uncertainty about how the world was changing, and so were we. The future was bright and optimistic, yet tinged with fear about our planet. I discovered rave culture and, through that, drugs towards the end of my teen years, 16 or 17, around the turn of the millennium. It was a naively optimistic time, hot and heavy, fun and carefree. The events of September 11th occurred at the tail end of my teenage years, and things changed significantly. Story 48. I was both a lazy and active person. I spent a lot of time in different places but was lazy at home and did not go out often. I can't say I regret it, but now I can't do the things I want to do because I'm an adult with responsibilities and a job. Story 49. Raising 2 honorary children, caring for my mother, and learning to be a better person. It is not an experience worth sharing. Story 50. I was very depressed as a teenager. I listened to a lot of music, dyed my hair frequently, got over 30 piercings, including some that I had redone, and spent excessive time online, which still applies today. Story 51. It was pretty boring, actually. I accepted the fact that I am gay, but I lived in a small mountain town, so I never really had a chance to meet other guys. I focused on school and worked 2 jobs, hung out with friends, ate food, or went hiking during any spare moment. I left 3 months after turning 18 and haven't been back. I kind of miss my hometown now. Story 52. I had a great time during my youth. I skateboarded, played baseball, and hung out with friends bike riding and causing mischief. I often explored, sometimes in dangerous areas, and I was super curious about many things. I explored various sexual activities with my girlfriend, with whom I had a long, trusting relationship. Literally every day after school, we made out for hours and held each other, eventually leading to more intimate experiences, all in good time without rushing. It felt like we were on the same page, with an unparalleled curiosity and desire for each other for the first time. I had a job at an ice cream shop that allowed me to go to the movies or out on dates. I often went out of my way to surprise my girlfriend, which made me truly happy. I snow skated, made short films, and treated myself to ice cream with Reese's cups and brownies. I had an active and fast metabolism. I played guitar, crocheted, created electronic music, and played video games both at home and with friends during LAN parties in basements or garages. I went to school dances for my girlfriend and dropped baseball to join 2 plays with her. I wasn't doing drugs and stayed in shape, filled with energy, and genuinely enjoyed life. My hormones were through the roof. I wrote, found new music, learned to code, and painted. My confidence grew immensely during that time. I was naive and discovering more about my capabilities. I began to feel a sense of freedom and truly leaned into my identity. Being around many peers was great. I'm happy I made it through those years alive despite many close calls. I used to drive recklessly and took risks in ways I would never consider now. I thought I was invincible despite experiencing a collapsed lung from lack of body fat, a terrible car crash, broken ribs, a ripped ear from a school fight, and various injuries from skateboarding. Many people I knew were not as fortunate during high school. Some died due to various reasons shortly after. I had good parents. I treated them decently because I was happy, I think. I know I was a difficult teenager at times, but I didn't have to worry about basic needs, and I'm thankful for that and for their patience. I came from a middle-class family. Christmas was modest, with fruit in the stocking and clothes under the tree, but I was grateful. My mom could be tough, but my parents got along well enough not to harm my psyche. I had a small group of close friends, and most of the bullying I faced in middle school subsided somewhat in high school. As a member of the class of 2006, I felt the world was my oyster. I was fortunate not to have crippling life issues, significant debt, or serious heartbreak during my teen years due to my decisions. I didn't experience existential dread. I was motivated, felt like I had time, and was using it to its fullest with optimism. Did I peak in high school? No, I'm in a great place now in many ways, but I would love to regain some of the aspects I had in my youth. Perhaps I need to realign. Sometimes it felt like I woke up in a different world, but I also realized that I have repressed many feelings. I wasn't the best student, experienced terrible stress, and my girlfriend ultimately cheated on me. All sorts of negative thoughts began bubbling up beneath the surface, taking time to reveal themselves like dominoes falling over the following decade. Story 53. Ostracized from all but the nerdiest of circles for reasons I had little knowledge of, let alone control over. I tried to keep to myself, but that didn't stop bullies from making life difficult. I consider myself lucky to have graduated from middle school. I sometimes had thoughts of ending it all, but I held on for the few who cared about me. Story 54. I have a tendency, possibly related to autism, that has been taken advantage of, resulting in the parent I live with doing very little to help clean the house. I attended only 2 years of public school and experienced a lot of homeschooling without any real teaching. My consistent interest in science as it applies to video games made me an unofficial assistant teacher in a high school science class. Ultimately, I discovered my true passion for aviation through this experience. Story 55. I lived a double life. At school, I was often bullied and unpopular. After school, I found a group of older friends who welcomed me. We spent time together drinking and smoking marijuana, enjoying ourselves every week. Those guys are like brothers to me, and I still talk to them frequently. It was both good and bad. Story 56. I was never allowed to have friends unless my mother knew their parents. The one time she let me out, we got caught with alcohol. So my idea of sneaking out became taking the dog to the pet store. I am now 40 years old with one friend and do not derive any joy from social activities. Story 57. Parents had a difficult divorce, from the age of 12 onward, filled with lawyers, social workers, psychologists, and a new boyfriend who abused me. I wish I had the chance to experience a teenage phase. I was just in survival mode. Story 58. I was feeling depressed and full of anxiety, and I wasn't always the best person to be around. However, I had a close circle of friends who brought me joy, so it wasn't all bad. When I wasn't with them, I was in my bedroom, avoiding my family. Story 59. All I remember is constant anxiety, frustration, confusion, and hopelessness. I have a few positive memories, but it's mostly negative. I am doing well now, though. It does get better. Take your medication and get it done. Story 60. Awkward, anxious, and challenging experiences can serve as growth opportunities from which to learn. However, many of these moments were never recorded or shared with a wide audience. I can only imagine how much more difficult it would be to face those challenges in today's world. Story 61. Awkward and full of cringeworthy moments that I experienced. I look back and ask myself, why did I do that? Story 62. I was incarcerated while in 8th grade and placed on probation. I spent a lot of time in and out due to probation violations, as social workers often used incarceration as a timeout. For instance, if I was 30 seconds late getting home from school, I faced a week in jail. I don't know how I made it to age 33 with custody of my daughter, but here we are. Story 63. Extremely foolish. We engaged in excessive substance use, attended numerous parties, and ran from law enforcement, and a few of us did not survive to share our experiences. Fortunately, I cleaned up in time to maintain a somewhat normal intelligence level. Story 64. I was difficult to understand, perhaps even borderline sociopathic. Thanks to good friends and psychedelics, I gained a sense of empathy around the age of 19 and feel good about who I am now. Story 65. A young person who enjoyed playing a lot of MapleStory eventually reached their senior year and realized, wait, I have a loving family and great friends. What am I upset about? I just like the music and the nice girls. And then grew out of it. Story 66. I did many foolish things in my teenage years, and it was a wild ride. Fortunately, it was before the internet, so there is no record of the trouble I caused. I am surprised I made it through in one piece. Story 67. Honestly, I wish I had been more adventurous. I was raised in a chaotic family, so I chose to immerse myself in sports, work, and clubs to avoid being at home. Story 68. I was angry, very angry. I was a people pleaser on the outside. I'm not sure why, looking back. I am a much calmer, happier, and more optimistic person now, both inside and out. I like myself now much more. Story 69. I'm glad I made it out of my teenage years alive. I probably should have died a few times. I was difficult as a teenager, and I apologize to everyone I had contact with during those years. Story 70. I smoked and drank by the age of 13, becoming an alcoholic for 10 years. I dropped out of school after being labeled the worst student by the principal. I had many sexual encounters and began prostituting at 16. I became pregnant by a man in his 60s and experienced several abortions afterward. I frequently visited strip clubs and after-hours clubs, where I used various drugs. My mother passed away, and my 1-year-old daughter also died. Now I am saved and have been married for 12 years, and I have 2 other children. Story 71. I got involved with a community I shouldn't have at 16, and I have felt the urge to end my life for years because of it, but I always find a new excuse not to. Story 72. I was with the same guy from the age of 15 to almost 21 when he cheated on me and left me. I missed out on so much. I wish I had more stories about the crazy things I did with my friends. Instead, I avoid talking about my teenage years as much as possible because he was controlling and never let me have fun unless it involved him. Story 73. Mostly shy and a goody two-shoes, but the one time I went to a party, I received a citation, so now I am forever the problem child. Yes, I am a middle child. Story 74. I was not the best in school and tried to be as antisocial as possible. I did some things you wouldn't believe if you saw me or knew me. Overall, I would say it was a different experience. Story 75. I am surprised I never actually ended my life. This wasn't just during my teenage years. It lasted through my first 20 years. It was hell. I am undiagnosed autistic, and the friends I made growing up were actually bullies. I had no idea how difficult my home life was, but I am glad I do not live with them anymore. Now I have genuine friends, but it took me 15 years to realize that. Story 76. The worst time of my life, for sure. From active addiction to forced hospitalization, multiple suicide attempts, stomach pumps, and self-harm episodes. I'm glad I was admitted into rehabilitation, got sober, and thank God my frontal lobe developed. Story 77. I often felt out of place. My family moved from the rural South to a city, and I felt like a fish out of water. My accent made me stand out. Story 78. It was full of challenges, including substance abuse and complicated emotions. My parents were neglectful, and my grandparents took me in as their youngest child. I put them through a lot, and the only one who truly saw the results of my efforts was my grandmother. However, I believe my grandfather would be very proud of the person I became after leaving the military. Story 79. I could have been a little nicer. Well, a lot nicer. I was unkind and disliked everyone for no reason at all. What is up with that? Too many substances and too much rebellion. My poor mom. I do not know what I did to deserve the life I live today, but I am very grateful for it. Story 80. I was bullied every day because of my weight. It still bothers me in my 40s, even though I am in the best shape of my life. Story 81. The only street sign I ever shot in my life was when I was driving the police cruiser. I pulled over and asked the officer for his service revolver while he was sitting in the passenger seat. I got out of the car and shot the sign a few times, then got back in, handed him his revolver, and drove the cruiser away. That may give you some insight into how my teenage years were. Back then, safe sex meant patting the headboard, and designated driver meant someone needed to be sober enough to find the car at 2:30 a.m. Glory days. Story 82. I was a fun-loving troublemaker and had many friends. I am still a troublemaker with many friends, but I am a very different person now. Troublemakers can change somewhat. Story 83. Chaos and drama create a situation where one feels fortunate to not be in jail or dead. If I had social media, these experiences would be amplified significantly. However, they were good times. Story 84. Hated ages 12 to 13. Fought with my mother. I was kicked out of the house and went to live with my dad. I switched school systems. Loved ages 14 to 18. Made new friends and felt accepted. I tried sports and studied hard, becoming a student with an Ivy League acceptance. I formed great lifelong friendships and had my first girlfriend. I explored intimacy. I'm uncertain about age 19. I was too busy studying at an Ivy League school. I had a second girlfriend but waited until junior year to become intimate. I feel I wasted time by staying in that relationship too long. Story 85. I felt like the awkward introvert kid who struggled to express myself. Although I could have been more outgoing, I appreciate my younger self. Story 86. I was a nightmare. I have apologized to my mom several times since growing up for being such a wild child. Story 87. Trying to deal with being sexually assaulted by my best friend, while already suffering from severe depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, and crippling obsessive-compulsive disorder, along with undiagnosed autism, has been incredibly challenging. Mentally, I was in chaos. However, I must give myself credit for not turning to drugs or alcohol. I remained a well-behaved student, but I eventually gave up on the school system. Story 88. Man, it was bad. I was obsessed with the opposite sex, so much so that I couldn't talk to them. I was very fit, with a six-pack, 6 feet 3 inches tall, dark and everything, but I was a ball of nerves and insecurity beneath the surface. I suffered even more because most girls assumed I was a womanizer. Those years were tough, but I matured a lot by 19, thankfully. From ages 14 to 17, I focused on my kickboxing and drumming. Story 89. It was difficult because there was a lot of drama in my family, and I felt insecure. I was a latchkey kid, sheltered and naive because my parents were very controlling. I would go to school and then return home. Story 90. I like to describe it as my villain phase. I was born into my hero phase. Good-hearted, pure, naive, just happy to be alive and knowing nothing of any evil in the world. Everything was sunshine and rainbows. My teens to mid-20s marked my villain phase. Abuse, heartbreak, trauma, pain, homelessness, drugs, and alcohol. All the bad things life has to offer turned me into the Joker. I didn't expect to make it past 25, and I just wanted to watch the world burn. From my mid-20s onward, currently in my mid-30s, this is my anti-hero phase. I overcame the villain phase and realized that I need to harness the best of both worlds. I want to be good, do good, set examples, take care of people, take care of myself, and try to make the world a better place. However, don't be afraid to do what you need to do in the name of all that is good. Sometimes good people have to do bad things. Know the difference and do the best you can. Story 91. I was quiet, withdrawn, and a bit lonely. At that time, I had no idea who I was. However, I have learned a few things recently that helped make sense of my lonely teen years, as I didn't have many friends. I was also nihilistic and dressed in goth style, which has always reflected my personality. Unfortunately, I don't have the money to dress that way anymore. Story 92. A lot of anger and depression led me to try to be good, follow the rules, and do what I was supposed to do. I wouldn't want to be young again for anything. Story 93. I made some mistakes, but I played sports and had a job. As a result, I really didn't have time to get involved in anything too extreme. I planned to do that with my children. Story 94. I felt very depressed and lacked a personal identity. I would have an emo style one day and wear flowers and bright colors the next. I was also dating two men in their 30s. Forget about them. Story 95. I remember working until 3 a.m. with two jobs to pay my mom's bills while she was often not home, and my dad was not in the picture. Over 4 years, I managed to save enough to buy a pre-built $1,000 PC. The rest went toward living on minimum wage. I don't recall what I really did on the computer except play StarCraft 2. It was a difficult time both financially and mentally. Story 96. I was a responsible kid. I had a job and got my driver's license at 16. I stayed out of trouble, but it certainly wasn't boring. My parents still treated me like I was a troublemaker and not good enough. After graduating high school, I thought, screw it, they are already disappointed. Let's give them a real reason to be disappointed. Story 97. I ran 3 miles through the woods with less than an eighth of marijuana, trying to evade the police. Now that I'm older and not as reckless, I realize they would have let me go with a warning, especially since it would have been my first offense. The consequences for running would be much more severe. Ages 13 to 19 are filled with experiences like that. Story 98. Many people were jealous of me, and I faced constant conversations with individuals who weren't my true friends. My best friend became my worst enemy, and I experienced bullying from my parents and coach. I moved out at 16 to pursue hockey. The girls who liked me were only interested in my hockey career, and after I made it to the National Hockey League, I became someone who no longer communicates with others, including my own family. Story 99. I am 20, so not exactly an adult yet, but I have definitely reflected on myself a lot. Once I turned 14, I entered an emo phase. During the pandemic, I was stuck with my mom, my younger brother, and my stepdad. I also somehow found internet fame, which made me a bit egotistical. I struggled with depression and other mental health issues, but sometimes I was just difficult. I hated my stepdad for no reason. He is actually a great person, and I blamed my mother for everything. Now that I am 20 and living on my own, seeing my brother at 14 makes me uneasy. It pains me to witness the way he talks to her and the fights they have had, as he also struggles with mental health issues. Recently, my mother called me because my stepdad was on a work trip, and she was home alone with my brother, who was having a meltdown. When I arrived, I heard distressing things about him hurting himself, harming us, and saying he hates our mom and that she doesn't care about him. I simply closed the door on him, asked my mother to sit somewhere else, and hugged her. I apologized if I ever acted like that at his age. She did not do much for us. I find myself in a peculiar position where I can relate to a lot of my brother's feelings, not his threats, of course, and can be a safe space for him when he needs a break, as well as a safe space for my mom to call when she needs to talk. The teenage boy phase seems much worse than the teenage girl phase. Story 100. I was a good teenager in the sense that I never did anything illegal, behaved well, did okay in school and sports, and had a nice group of friends. I have done many more adventurous things as an adult than I did as a teenager. It is more enjoyable that way, in my opinion, without parents controlling you and you have significantly more money to spend. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.